The jarring ring of my cell phone startled me from my mundane afternoon. I fumbled to grab it from the coffee table, nearly spilling my lukewarm tea. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. The voice on the other end was one I never expected to hear again. My ex-mother-in-law, Edna. "Cassie, it's time." Her stern tone gave me chills. "How could you think of missing Silas's funeral?" I froze in disbelief. Silas, my high school sweetheart turned ex-husband, had died over a year ago, lost in a tragic car accident. At least, that was what Edna had told me herself in her last bitter phone call. "Wait, what?" I stammered. "I don't understand. Silas already." Edna cut me off sharply. "Don't play dumb. The service is tomorrow at St. Mary's." My pulse pounded as I struggled to make sense of her words. St. Mary's, where Silas and I had married 13 years ago. "Edna, you told me Silas died last January," I insisted, my voice shaking. "You said you blamed me." "And he did," she snapped. "But now he's passed again. Don't tell me you plan on disrespecting my boy by not showing up." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat paralyzed, my 4-year-old son Eli's laughter from the next room barely registering through the fog clouding my mind. Somehow in my gut, I knew Edna's call was no cruel prank. I grabbed my laptop with trembling hands, quickly typing Silas's name into the search bar. An obituary stared back at me from the glowing screen. My handsome ex-husband, frozen forever at age 32. Yesterday's date marked the finality of it in black and white. Silas was truly gone. But how? None of this made any sense. I skimmed the details of the tribute through vision blurred by tears. A tragic construction accident, survived by his wife Marcella and their infant son. Marcella. Her name jolted me as my shock morphed to anger. The woman Silas had left me for when I was pregnant with Eli. The woman who had swooped in to take my place. I shoved back the bitter memories threatening to overwhelm me. Marcella was far in my past now, just like Silas. But this funeral brought everything roaring back. Grabbing Eli's hand, I resolutely led him out the door to my car. I had to know what kind of sick game was being played here. And I refused to let Eli's rightful place be erased by the woman who had already taken so much from us. St. Mary's loomed before me more foreboding than I remembered as I marched towards it. Eli's little hand nestled securely in my grip. I did not know what I would discover inside about Silas's supposed double death, but I knew one thing for certain. I would protect my son and the truth at all costs. The pews of St. Mary's were packed, stifling even, yet an almost eerie silence still hung in the incense-filled air. I clutched Eli close as I made my way to the front, ignoring the glares and whispers cutting through me with each step. I held my breath, bracing myself for my first glimpse at the photos adorning Silas's closed casket. Sure enough, the images chilled me to my core as we approached. Smiling portraits encircled elaborate bouquets and candles, a vibrant Silas frozen in time forever at 32 years old, exactly as the recent obituary had depicted him. My gaze turned towards the largest portrait, which featured Silas embracing a woman with flowing blonde hair and a cunning smile, Marcella. Underneath it sat a makeshift playpen where Marcella's infant son kicked and cooed, oblivious to the morbid day marking his father's death. I had just bent down instinctively to soothe the crying baby when a cold hand grasped my arm. "Who do you think you're fooling?" A harsh voice spat as I spun around. I stared into the soulless gray eyes of Marcella herself, still clutching the child to her hip with a painted claw. "Get away from my son." Anger swelled within me. This fraud, raising Silas's boy, playing the role of the pretty young widow to milk this for all it was worth, it was revolting. "Didn't expect to see the ex-wife, now did you?" I seethed back, letting my contempt show. "Oh, and congratulations on the supposed tragic accident." Blood drained from Marcella's face. "Why, you little—" She sputtered, composing herself as mourners glanced our way. Her expression transformed to a well-practiced pout as she dabbed mock tears and sauntered towards the open casket. I watched with disgust as Marcella embraced Silas' parents, her sniffles loud in the pin-drop silence. Even now, her only concern was maintaining appearances for the sake of their fortune and estate. So blinded by greed that they actually believed her lies and supported this gold digger next to their only son's grave. A small hand in mine reminded me this show was not my concern anymore. I had my own flesh and blood to protect and promises to keep. The thought fueled me as I turned my back on Marcella's performance. with a resolve colder than the ice in her glare when she cried on their shoulders. She would not get away with this act of manipulation, and she would certainly never lay her claws on what was meant for Eli. Over the sobs, the priest invited us to view Silas one final time. With one last glance at Eli, we slowly approached the casket, flanked by flashy floral tributes like misplaced trophies. Lying inside, Silas looked hollow, almost diminished, a shell of the bright and vibrant soul I had once called mine. "Never forget that truth prevails over deception, no matter how wicked," I whispered softly to Eli as I squeezed his shoulder. As we left Silas to whatever peace death would bring him, I vowed we would uncover what Marcella so desperately wanted hidden behind her web of lies. The funeral took every ounce of my energy. As we exited the suffocating church, I knew uncovering Marcella's deceit was now non-negotiable. I asked my neighbor Holly, Eli's godmother, to watch him for a bit. Then I headed downtown, my heels clicking on the pavement with purpose as Silas's law firm came into view. I didn't have an appointment, but my determination must have shown. Before I could even open my mouth, his former assistant Julia embraced me in a tight hug. "Cassie? I can't believe it," she said, dabbing her eyes delicately with a monogrammed handkerchief. "First the accident, now this?" My ears perked up, senses on high alert. "Accident?" I asked. "You mean when he passed before?" Julia nodded, confusion knitting her brows. "Yes, last year. The awful car wreck out on River Road. I assumed you knew. They brought his body in and—" She trailed off with a shudder. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. There had been no tragic construction accident like Marcella declared, which meant she deliberately kept Silas's first death from me, allowing her to stage this second funeral circus under the guise of recent widowhood. Bile rose in my throat as the ugliness of her ploy came into sharp focus. By hiding Silas's initial passing, she ensured the steady flow of child support she orchestrated from my account, for Eli, right into her scheming hands. I thought I was providing for my boy, but in reality, that witch likely used every cent to fund her plush new lifestyle. As fury and disgust overwhelmed me, I managed to choke out the other burning question. "The baby, is he really Silas's?" Julia shook her head before lowering her voice to barely a whisper. "Rumor has it they were already separated when she got pregnant, but once Silas passed, she saw her opportunity." I reeled at this, the final crushing blow. In addition to using my son, this harpy had trapped my ex-in-laws with the ultimate manipulation, a motherless grandchild to dote on. Even in death, she ensured Silas's fortune would fund her through the boy's college years and beyond. Meanwhile, she attempted to erase my Eli completely, threatening his only connection to Silas's family and inheritance. Overcome with anger, I stormed out of the office, nearly knocking over a vase of lilies sent in loving memory of Silicon Valley's most ambitious lawyer. As I arrived on Marcella's manicured block, I felt containing my rage would be impossible. Sure enough, the sight of her smug smile enraged me as she rocked on the front porch with the baby nestled against her. Not today, witch, I thought. The next hour was a satisfying blur of unleashed fury as I confronted her with all I had learned. With each newly exposed truth, I relished the growing panic in her eyes. Her defeat was palpable, as I declared I would be filing a lawsuit first thing Monday morning to settle this injustice once and for all. "You can slither back into whatever hole you crawled from now," I spat as I turned to leave. "You'll never see another dime meant for my son." I walked away with strides full of renewed purpose. For justice, for Eli's legacy, and for the truth Silas deserved. This victory left the sweet taste of revenge on my lips at last. And tomorrow, the real fight would begin. I arrived at the lawyer's office, fueled by caffeinated determination, clutching folders full of paperwork I had gathered over the weekend. Bank statements, legal documents, Marcella's venomous threats. I was armed and ready for battle. The meeting started smoothly as I recounted my discoveries. The lawyer, Mr. Silverstein, listened thoughtfully, periodically adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. Finally, he cleared his throat and leaned forward. "While these revelations about Marcella's past schemes are certainly concerning, without concrete evidence of current illegal activities, I'm afraid there's little ground for a case," he said gently. My eager smile faded. "What? She manipulated a dead man's estate for her own gain?" I slid the threatening SMS messages across his desk. and she's clearly planning to deny my son his rightful inheritance." Mr. Silverstein grimaced as he perused Marcella's texts, gloating about securing power of attorney. "While distasteful, her actions appear strategically within legal bounds," he said. "Since you never married your son's claim." I cut him off, unable to contain my boiling frustration. So this witch can flaunt her schemes and lies, but I'm just supposed to sit and wait for her next underhanded attack? Sighing, Mr. Silverstein removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "Without proof of actual fraud, we have no grounds for legal action. My best advice would be to wait it out." I slammed my hands on the desk, trembling with anger as I rose. "Unacceptable! My son's future is at stake thanks to that soulless, money-grubbing—" A knock interrupted my tirade. The door creaked open to reveal Julia, her eyes wide with shock. "Sorry to interrupt, but Cassie, you must come quickly." Julia cried breathlessly. "I just overheard Marcella on the phone with a strange man. They mentioned documents, custody." My heart seized in my chest. Marcella was already striking with her next scheme. I grabbed my bag, my mind reeling. "Did you hear anything else?" I asked. Julia shook her head apologetically. As we turned to rush out, Mr. Silverstein handed me a business card. "Call me immediately if you uncover solid evidence of wrongdoing," he instructed firmly. "With concrete proof, we can build a case." We sped back to Julia's office, where she recounted the bits of conversation she had overheard. As she mimicked the man's slimy tone, bragging about eliminating obstacles, my blood ran cold. This was beyond manipulation. Marcella had crossed over into criminality, and my son was the intended target. We had to catch her red-handed and fast. As Julia made calls checking databases, reality sank in. My days of civility were over. I had to stop reacting and take action. For Eli's sake, it was time to set the trap and play dirty. The pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. Bank statements I had discovered showed large, frequent transfers to a business associate named Derek. A quick online search of his profile made his line of work clear. And baiting this snake out of hiding would surely expose Marcella right along with him. As I plotted out the trap, adrenaline flooded my veins. By weaponizing Marcella's own ugly tactics against her, I would finally take back control. For the sake of Eli's future, her cruelty would be repaid in kind at last. This ended now. The annual Silicon Valley Law Gala was the perfect backdrop for my trap. I had discovered Marcella would be here tonight schmoozing potential investors for her new lifestyle brand. Bile rose in my throat, imagining her peddling leggings and false widowhood in the same breath. Well, not anymore. Tonight her lies would be exposed for the world to see. I had chosen my bait carefully, luring the ominous Derek to a shadowy rendezvous with the promise of a payoff. My eyewitness waited strategically behind a marble column, ready to catch every incriminating exchange on video. All that remained was springing the confrontation I had planned, so Marcella's facade would come crumbling down in front of the cream of the crop attendees. I spotted her across the ballroom, draped in an ostentatious black dress, already working the room with dramatic flair. Time to steal the spotlight, I thought, striding towards her, with rage burning through my veins. "Why, Cassie, what a surprise!" Marcella drawled, her expression morphing from warm charm to icy hatred in an instant. "I'm terribly sorry, but this is a private event. Now run along." The circle of executives glanced between us, curiosity piqued by the palpable tension. Perfect. "Private event, I scoffed. "More like hunting ground for your next victim right under the guise of entrepreneurship? Have you handed out catalogs showcasing your full web of lies yet?" Flashes of anger and fear crossed Marcella's face. "Why, I never. Someone escort this mad woman out at once." But her feigned outrage merely made me laugh. "Come now, Marcy, why don't you share with these kind folks how you conned my grieving ex-in-laws?" I swept my arm towards the captive audience, leverage exactly as I had planned. "Tell them how you seduced my husband away and then faked widowhood twice over for access to his millions." The watching crowd murmured uncomfortably. Before Marcella could respond, her cell phone rang. With trembling hands she answered, breathless fear filling her eyes as she listened. After a long pause, she choked out, "You told me this would work, that no one would ever find out." I grinned wickedly, crossing my arms. "Trouble with your partners in crime, I take it?" Marcella stared at me wild-eyed as I continued. Did you really think we wouldn't uncover your shady plans with that brute Derek to steal my son's inheritance? Right on cue, Julia stepped forward, clutching her phone, still recording Derek's incriminating exchange. "We have it all right here," Julia declared. "Your threats, lies, and hired thugs caught discussing falsifying custody documents." Marcella collapsed to her knees as her world crumbled around her, the damning evidence now on full display for all to witness at last. I leaned down, my tone icy. "Your games end here. You knew exactly what you stood to gain from my family's loss, and you didn't care who you destroyed in the process. Well, now the spotlight is on you." Satisfaction washed over me seeing her cowering and exposed. As security approached, Marcella searched the crowd, desperately seeking an ally, but she found only looks of disgust reflecting back at her. The bitter taste of retribution was even sweeter than I imagined. Finally, I had justice for Eli, for Silas's legacy, and above all, for the truth. Marcella's web of deception lay in ruins all around her. Now it was her turn to lose everything, and I would ensure she answered for her crimes if it was the last thing I did. The weeks following Marcella's public shaming blended together in a flurry of legal motions and strategy sessions. With evidence of her shady dealings now on full display, the battle had shifted to the courtroom. I sat calmly smoothing my dress suit as Mr. Leah Silverstein paced, reviewing our plan of attack. With the video footage clearly implicating Derek, Marcella's remaining credibility is questionable at best, he affirmed. Our case highlighting her deceit around Silas's estate and inheritance rights is quite strong. I nodded, steeling myself as we entered the imposing courtroom. Marcella sat at the defendant's table, the hollows of her cheeks betraying her normally glamorous visage. Her bloodshot eyes narrowed to slits as I held her glare with steely determination. The fantasies of my victory had kept me energized throughout sleepless nights. Today, sweet justice would finally be served. The room fell silent as the judge entered. For 3 tense hours, Mr. Silverstein presented an impenetrable wall of evidence showcasing every manipulating half-truth and bold-faced lie Marcella had spun to profit off Silas's tragic death. Phone records proved her secrecy around his actual passing. Bank statements exposed money funneled from my personal accounts straight into her pockets, and most damning, Derek's own written testimonial implicated Marcella as the true mastermind behind the plot to erase my son's claim. I watched Marcella's haughty facade slowly crack and crumble as the weight of truth exposed her deceit. As Mr. Silverstein turned the floor over to her, she sat frozen for a long minute before stammering weakly in self-defense. But her sputtering lies stood no chance now. She had no choice but to confess haltingly to concealing Silas's initial death. A gasp rippled through the gallery at this admission. When pressed about her motivation by the judge, Marcella dissolved into hysterical sobs about debts and bad investments. My lip curled in disgust, hearing her still make excuses rather than take accountability. After she composed her sniveling, the judge turned to Mr. Silverstein. "In lieu of this compelling evidence, I am prepared to rule on the matter of Silas Gray's estate and inheritance rights. Please approach." This was it, the moment that had kept me fighting through countless ruthless attacks. Marcella paled as we stood next to her, awaiting the verdict that would decide my son's fate. On the matter of Silas Gray's estate, full rights shall be granted to his named next of kin, his son Elijah. My breath caught as joyful shock washed over me. Additionally, Miss Marcella Pierce will hereby repay all misallocated funds and forfeit any custody claim over the child. I blinked back grateful tears as justice rained down at long last, stripping the woman who had taken so much from my son for her own gain. The rest was a dizzying rush of celebratory hugs and phone calls to Eli, who giggled gleefully at the news. Meanwhile, Marcella sat frozen, the judge's gavel signaling her defeat. I watched as bailiffs approached to apprehend her on formal fraud charges tied to years of financial deception. As they led her shambling body past me, I stood tall, finally seeing her for the powerless coward she was, without her web of lies for protection. "You forget who you were dealing with," I said coldly. "Did you really think you could threaten my child, Silas's child, without consequence?" As she disappeared from view for good, I let the sweet taste of revenge wash over me at last. With her poisonous shadow now banished from our lives forever, Eli and I could finally embrace the bright future that was rightfully his. Justice indeed prevailed. In the weeks following the trial, I was able to breathe freely for the first time in years. Marcella was sentenced to 3 years behind bars, a satisfactory reckoning for the havoc she had wreaked on countless lives. The duty of tying up legal loose ends around Silas's estate fell to my trusted advisor, Julia. As we sat signing paperwork, joy overwhelmed me seeing Eli's inheritance fully secured at last by his rightful guardians, Silas's parents Edna and Richard. A soft knock interrupted us. Edna entered, her usual haughty aura replaced by something resembling humility. "Cassie, I can't thank you enough for what you did," she said haltingly. Richard nodded behind her, his eyes glistening. We were so blinded. We never imagined Marcella was manipulating us that entire time. I studied their faces intently. The past could never be erased, but perhaps this ordeal had opened their eyes to what mattered most now. Family. I reached across the table and squeezed Edna's hand gently. "Let's focus on the future for Eli's sake." Richard and Edna both smiled through tears. For all our rocky history, we shared an unexpected bond now as guardians of Silas's legacy. Over lunch, we laughed reminiscing about a young, vibrant Silas, the man we all loved in different ways. Edna even shared baby pictures I had never seen before. A warmth filled me realizing that perhaps some good could come from even the darkest storms. Later at home, while tucking Eli into bed, I decided to share part of the story that had led us here. I told an age-appropriate version, not mentioning Marcella by name but focusing on themes of honesty, family, and karma. His big brown eyes widened with childlike awe as I spoke. "So that mean Lady lied? Is that why you had to go fight the bad guys in court?" I kissed Eli on the forehead, my heart swelling with pride. "Yes, my smart boy, but now the truth came out, just like it always does, and that mean lady can't ever bother us again." Eli giggled and squeezed his stuffed dog, the one Silas had given him years ago. "Well, I'm glad, 'cause now we get to stay with Grandma and Grandpa and inherit Daddy's big building downtown." I had to laugh at his innocent understanding of the legal complexity, but in his eyes shone the optimism and hope I had fought so hard to protect. Over the next year, life took on a beautiful rhythm I had scarcely allowed myself to imagine. Weekday breakfasts with Grandma and Grandpa, Sunday picnics reminiscing about Silas while Eli played, laughter, joy, and new memories bonding us together after so much loss. The only dark cloud still lingering was my regular visit to a maximum security prison to stare Marcella down as she crumbled mentally and physically under the weight of her crimes. To some it may have seemed cruel satisfaction, but having her fate sealed behind those unforgiving walls gave me peace of mind. Soon the anniversary of Silas's death arrived, a bittersweet milestone marking the closing of a painful chapter. We gathered as a family at his grave, each placing a rose while Eli babbled happily about his daddy. I gasped as Eli suddenly froze, pointing behind us all starry-eyed. "Look, it's Daddy!" he squealed. "Hi, Daddy!" We all turned with a start, seeing nothing but a glowing sunbeam breaking through the clouds. But somehow, I knew in that moment, Silas's spirit swirled around us, and through Eli's eyes, he witnessed the justice, closure, and family his memory deserved. Finally, we could all rest peacefully, thanks to the truth rising at last. The past was finally laid to rest on this sacred ground. Another year slipped by, filled with healing and closure. Our family grew closer than I ever could have imagined. Eli flourished with the love and support of 2 doting grandparents, and I found meaning embracing my role protecting Silas's legacy. But lingering darkness still occupied my thoughts. Marcella deserved to rot in prison, yet her continued existence so close by prevented me from ever fully moving on. The time had come for a fresh start, far away from the ghosts of past betrayal. My decision made, I gently broke the news to Edna and Richard over family dinner. Edna lowered her fork, eyes glistening with emotion. "Oh, Cassie, must you really go?" she asked softly. "These years with you and Eli have meant the world to us." I squeezed her hand, my own eyes welling up. "I'll forever be grateful for how you welcomed Eli, but too many memories haunt me here." I glanced at Eli playing happily. He deserves to grow up free from the shadows of his father's past. Richard cleared his throat gruffly. "We understand, dear. A clean slate is what you both need. But please, let us help set you up so Eli's future is secure." My heart swelled at this gesture. the ultimate display of love for the grandson they almost lost. That means everything. Thank you both, truly. Over the next few weeks, I tied up loose ends while Edna and Richard handled real estate and financial logistics. The day of our move finally arrived, bittersweet yet brimming with hope. Edna fussed over Eli, sneaking cookies and treats into his luggage when she thought I wasn't looking. As we stood at the front door for final goodbyes, the weight of the moment sank in. Edna pulled me into a crushing hug. "Promise you'll let us visit very soon?" she asked tearfully. "Maybe for Eli's next birthday?" I smiled through my own tears. "Of course, you're both welcome anytime. Take good care of Richard, okay?" Edna chuckled wetly with a wink. After one final check that Eli was securely buckled in his car seat, we all exchanged final hugs. As I shifted the car into drive, Eli cried, "Bye, Grandma! Bye, Grandpa!" while frantically waving his little hand. We drove in silence for a while, fields and farms zipping past outside. I breathed deeply, déjà vu washing over me from that pivotal drive to Silas's second funeral years ago. So much life had happened since. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Eli suddenly piped up from the back seat. I smiled at his bright eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're going to start a new adventure, baby. New city, new house. Doesn't that sound exciting?" Eli nodded enthusiastically. "Will I make new friends?" "Oh, and visit Daddy, too?" My heart fluttered hearing his innocent understanding. "Yes, my sweet boy, all of that and more. A fresh start for you and me." I clicked on the radio as a beloved song came on, the same one played at Silas's wedding during our first dance. My pulse quickened at the serendipity. Glancing in the mirror again, I was struck by Eli's resemblance to his father, his same kind eyes and grin. Silas's presence filled the space around us, enveloping me in warmth and propelling us onwards, towards the new memories we would make, carrying his spirit in our hearts forever. The past was finally laid to rest. Now nothing but open road and bright skies ahead, ready for our new beginning.
So I'm going to buy that new luxury car you have, Sandra. Normal people, it is not for them. My parents have been discussing buying a new car, and I can tell that Peter has changed since we were married. He seems more self-centered. He wants my parents' car they gave me because it's just nicer than his own, and I'm honestly through. My name is Sandra. It turned out I was 28 years old, and Peter had been with me since we were in college together. 3 years into our marriage. Peter is outgoing and kind of popular, whereas I am shy with only a few friends. Our conversations increased over college courses, and eventually we began to study together. Peter's interest in me was unexpected, but he took me by surprise when he asked me out. I was overjoyed and immediately said yes, marking the beginning of our relationship. What drew me to Peter was his charm, friendliness, and dedication to his studies. However, for him, the situation could have been different, since he had numerous attractive and stylish female friends. And finding another girlfriend would not have been difficult for him. Once I courageously asked him if he truly thought I was the right one for him. He seemed taken aback and questioned why I would ask such a thing. I confessed my lack of confidence and sought to understand why he chose me. After a pause, he replied that he was comfortable being with me. His answer left me unsatisfied, but before I could express more, he appeared irritated and distracted himself with his phone. Not wanting to escalate to an argument, I dropped the topic, agreeing with him and apologizing for bringing it up, though I still harbored doubts. As time moved on, our relationship continued to flow smoothly. We completed college, got married, and settled into a condo. I secured a job at a standard company, while Peter pursued further education and research. When I informed my mom about our engagement, she was thrilled, though she admitted they were beginning to worry about when I'd introduce a boyfriend. Although I felt guilty for not mentioning Peter sooner, my mom understood, acknowledging my independent nature. Knowing Peter was there for me gave her peace of mind. My parents, who met in college and still deeply love each other, serve as my role models. My dad diligently worked his way up at a large company while my mom supported him and also followed her culinary passions, becoming quite skilled at it. My parents have always respected each other's boundaries and supported each other's passions, like my mom, who now teaches cooking classes. Growing up in such an environment, I learned the value of independence early on. Although I was only really skilled at studying, I chose not to pursue graduate school because I wanted to be self-reliant and start my own life. Despite coming from a well-off family, I was determined not to lean on them indefinitely. I aspired to build a family like the one I grew up in and make my parents proud, possibly by having children someday. This might seem like a straightforward goal, but for someone like me, it's a significant ambition. Once Peter and I started living together, things began to change. Peter was a graduate student and worked part-time, but he didn't contribute much financially. I tried to address this delicately, suggesting that it would be helpful if he could use more of his part-time earnings to help with our expenses. His response was dismissive. "I do contribute, you know. Didn't you say you'd handle the living expenses when we moved in together, Sandra?" His words left me feeling uneasy. Peter had always dreamed of becoming a professor, which is why he pursued graduate school. I had reassured him not to worry about finances, given my stable job. Yet when he retorted, I could only murmur in agreement, unsure of what else to say. Peter sighed heavily. "You wouldn't understand. Being a graduate student is expensive, but what about socializing instead of stuff? Oh, and by the way, I need $1,000 for a research trip. Can you lend it to me? I'll pay you back later." Requests like these became more frequent, and our problems intensified. He began spending more nights away, leaving me alone with cold meals and unanswered calls. When he did return home in good spirits, I was too forgiving. Sometimes, out of the blue, he would suggest, "Hey Sandra, remember you wanted to go somewhere? I have tomorrow off. Let's go." He would also compliment my cooking, making me feel valued. Every time he showed kindness, I saw the happy marriage I desired, which made me hesitate to confront the issues. However, deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. I felt increasingly lonely and anxious, trapped in a cycle of fleeting happiness and prolonged solitude. I found myself unable to share my marital struggles with anyone. I didn't want to distress my parents, who were genuinely happy about our marriage. However, they likely sensed that something was amiss. It had been a while since I had visited them, and when I finally did, my dad suggested I stay for dinner. My mom prepared a lavish meal to welcome me back. During the meal, my dad brought up that my Aunt Lori had recently visited and expressed a desire to see me. He described her as always being spontaneous, a trait that defined her lively, ambitious, and independent nature. "I'll reach out to her soon." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, appreciating their subtle way of reconnecting me with family support. Dad reminisced about how much Aunt Lori cared for me, and how she playfully lamented that Peter had stolen me, even though she had never intended to marry. Before I met Peter, Lori was more of a confidant than an aunt. I could discuss things with her that I couldn't with my parents. She understood me profoundly and was always there to support me. Initially, I had been too timid to discuss my relationship with Peter with her, but now I was eager to reconnect. A few days after I visited my parents, I met Lori at a cafe. She was as stylish as ever. Observing my outfit, she gently advised, "You know, Sandra, marriage is just the beginning of a lifelong journey for a woman. You should always feel confident and attractive. No matter what, your clothes can make a big difference, so don't forget to take care of yourself." Then with grace, she took a sip of her tea. Realizing how much I had neglected my interests, I apologized for not keeping in touch. Lori chuckled and replied, "That's typical of you, Sandra. It's good to be honest and serious, but being too timid usually stems from a lack of experience. But I was thrilled when I heard you found someone special. I thought, finally, Sandra is taking a step forward. It had been ages. Since I spent time with someone on a day off and the weather was perfect, it made for a much-needed and refreshing outing. We settled on the terrace, soaking up the warm sunlight. In that tranquil moment, I felt comfortable enough to share my concerns with Lori. Initially, I had believed that even someone as reserved as me could make a relationship work with Peter, but doubts had begun to cloud my thoughts. Lori listened attentively to my entire story, nodding empathetically without interruption. When I finished, she gently inquired, "I suppose you haven't mentioned this to your parents, have you, Sandra?" "No," I confessed. "I even hesitated to tell you today. I didn't want to acknowledge my vulnerabilities to anyone. I thought I should be capable of managing this on my own to be truly independent. I know if Mom and Dad found out, they'd probably want me back home immediately. So I want to try to handle this as much as I can by myself." Lori respected my wish to handle things independently and didn't press the issue further. However, she assured me, "If you ever really need help, let me know first. If my dear Sandra asks for help, I'll be there for you no matter where I am." A month later, my mom called me casually. "When you have time, could you come over? It's not urgent." Since I had the next day off, I decided to visit my parents. As I approached, I noticed a new car parked in the driveway, which sparked my excitement. "Dad, is this car new? Did you just get it? Can I take it for a spin?" I joked, my excitement palpable about the fancy car. "Don't worry about that. This car is for you, Sandra. You use it however you like. It'll come in handy," Mom whispered to me. "We saw this car in a TV commercial, and you said you liked it." Dad recalled, smiling warmly. "So it's our gift to you. You've been going through a tough time lately, so we wanted to cheer you up. If things get tough, just drive this and come home anytime." The car my dad gifted me was an SUV from a renowned international brand, a thoughtful gesture that brought a sense of freedom and support. Dad had even arranged a parking spot near my condo for the new SUV. I laughed in disbelief, barely able to grasp the kindness of the gesture. Later, as I drove downtown, I reached into my pocket, found the car key, and pressed the button. The lights of the SUV flashed brightly around me. It was then that I heard a familiar voice from behind. "What's with the car?" I turned to see Peter, my husband, who hadn't been home for quite some time. It felt like we were living separate lives. His presence left me momentarily speechless as he looked at the car with a smug grin. "Ah, I see, a gift from your parents, right?" Every time I faced Peter, I struggled to find my voice, but I was tired of feeling diminished. "Peter, don't you care anymore? Do you even care about me?" I managed to say, gathering my courage. Then Peter dropped a bombshell. "Are you just realizing now? Did you think I loved you all this time? It's ridiculous how hopeful you are." His mocking laughter echoed in my ears. Something inside me snapped, and I retorted louder than usual. "Then why did you marry me?" He coldly replied, "Wow, you're going to be that cold about it." I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. "So marrying me was just a meal ticket for you, huh? And now you want the car too because it's wasted on me. That's just great." Peter seemed unfazed by how hurtful his words were, and with a chilling indifference he added, "You know we're getting divorced. Without me, you'll never find another man. Think about it." With those harsh words, he left without a second glance, leaving me feeling both angry and heartbroken. My head pounded with a headache as I sat in the driver's seat, trying to calm myself. Eventually, I called my Aunt Lori for advice. After a few days of consideration, I agreed to the divorce and moved back in with my parents. They welcomed me with open arms, and life began to feel peaceful again. However, that peace was short-lived. One afternoon, Peter showed up at my parents' house, accompanied by his parents. They all sat down in the living room, and Peter's father spoke up in a stern tone. "We're here to talk about our son's divorce." When the discussions about the divorce began, Sandra issued a stern warning to Peter. "If you don't agree to the divorce, I'll use my parents' connections at the university to jeopardize your future." It wouldn't be difficult to harm the career of a junior registrar if their daughter files a complaint. Peter truly loved Sandra, but he felt her approach was overly aggressive, and it seemed she was trying to intimidate him. "We could easily contest the divorce," Peter's father argued. Feeling betrayed by Sandra. Beneath her simple appearance, she's manipulative and greedy. Poor Peter. I heard she paid him to keep his distance. She must have entertained other men. We should take this to family court and assert that Peter was coerced by his wife. However, if there's a genuine apology, things might be different. For instance, if Sandra gives up the car she's been driving, it might help smooth things over. Peter and his parents listened in silence, absorbing his father's protests. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and my mom answered it. Aunt Lori appeared behind her as she returned to the living room. "Sorry I'm late. How's the discussion going?" Peter's family had met Lori once at my wedding. "What are you doing here? It's rude to barge in like this. We're busy right now. Outsiders should leave," objected Peter's mother. "No, don't be like that," Lori replied, unfazed. "You've heard about Peter's divorce, right? How would an outsider like you know about that?" "I was informed by my brother earlier. I couldn't miss such an important moment for my dear niece." "You're probably here to stop the divorce or for money," someone accused. "Can you still say that after seeing this?" Lori retorted as she pulled out a stack of documents from her bag, laying them out on the table for everyone to see. "I hired a detective to look into this. It turns out Peter has been cheating on Sandra with multiple women despite being married. He hardly came home because of it. He took advantage of Sandra's kindness and even asked her for money." The revelation silenced the room, turning the tone of the meeting on its head as everyone processed the gravity of Lori's findings. I was immersed in my university research, so when I did manage to come home, we shared meals and went on trips together. "We seem just like any other married couple, right, Sandra?" "Say something," Peter implored, his voice laced with desperation. "Peter, you don't need to defend yourself. We'll handle this. It's not your fault," his father reassured him quickly. "That's right. These documents from who knows where are surely fabricated. Our Peter would never engage in such acts. He's a kind and outstanding son," his mother protested vehemently. "You might be kind to your parents, but it seems that your kindness doesn't extend beyond that." "Like father, like son indeed," Aunt Lori interjected sharply. Then she pulled out a photograph from the documents. "I was at a hotel for a business meeting recently and saw William there. He was with another woman, looking very cozy, so I had the detective look into William as well. The results were just as I suspected. Do you understand now?" Peter's mother's face turned pale as she grabbed the documents and examined them closely. "What is this, William? How long has this been going on? It's all lies, isn't it?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Kayla, stop looking. Give me that." William, looking panicked, tried to snatch the documents, but it was too late. Kayla, visibly distraught, confronted William directly. "You've been cheating on me. The car you wanted so badly was for her in these photos, wasn't it?" No matter how hard William tried to calm her down, Kayla wouldn't listen. The conversation about Peter's divorce was momentarily forgotten as Kayla stormed out of the house, tears streaming down her face, with William trailing behind her in a futile attempt to explain. Left in the ensuing chaos, Peter blurted out, "Hey, wait, what about me?" and followed them out, equally confused. The rest of us were left in stunned silence, but Aunt Lori had a satisfied look on her face, giving me a knowing wink. It was clear she had anticipated the dramatic unraveling of events, revealing truths that were perhaps long hidden but necessary to confront. After the tumultuous events, Aunt Lori shared with me that Peter's parents had eventually divorced. "You won't fall for such a terrible man again. Let's make you more attractive. I'll teach you everything about grooming yourself as a woman," Lori encouraged. Despite her busy schedule, she frequently visited and took me out for meals and shopping trips. During this time, I absorbed a great deal from her and gained a new perspective on self-care and confidence. A year after the divorce, I made a pivotal decision to attend graduate school. I dedicated myself to my studies and personal development, which was a transformative period for me. Time flew by, and one day, while at a street intersection, I heard someone call my name. I turned around to find Peter. "It's been a while. You've changed a lot, haven't you?" he remarked, a hint of surprise in his tone initially. I hardly recognized him. In Peter's eyes, the woman he once knew as his plain ex-wife had evolved into someone stunningly beautiful and confident. Meanwhile, Peter's life had taken a downturn following his parents' public divorce scandal. He had dropped out of graduate school as his parents, William and Kayla, had cut off their financial support due to the chaos he had instigated. Struggling to pay for his tuition and living expenses, the carefree life he once enjoyed was a distant memory. The women who had once been interested in him had drifted away, and his former glory had dissipated almost overnight. Now he stood before his ex-wife, who appeared utterly transformed. Just as Peter was about to suggest catching up, a man approached us. "Sorry for the wait. Are you a friend of Sandra's?" he asked. It was Kevin, the man I had recently started seeing. His arrival was perfectly timed, underscoring the new chapter of my life that Peter was no longer a part of. While I was out with Kevin, a group of women nearby couldn't help but notice him. "Wow, that guy is handsome, isn't he? He's so tall. Could he be a model?" they commented, admiring Kevin's striking appearance. Kevin, noticing my brief interaction with someone from my past, subtly acknowledged Peter with a nod. "He's someone from my past, but it's okay. We're finished talking. Let's go, shall we?" Kevin said, taking my hand. Peter stood there stunned as Kevin confidently led me away by the hand, without giving Peter another thought. Kevin and I walked towards the crosswalk. I kept my gaze straight ahead, focused on the path in front of us and the future that awaited. I didn't look back even once as we left. My name's Luna. I am a regular woman who has seen her share of some twists and turns. Well, I suppose that I will have to start at the beginning. I met Jack in high school. He was the shy, quiet kid who sat in the back of class and never said a word. It was me who came in first. "Hey Jack, got a minute?" The next time I saw him, in a physics class or something, I managed to ask about it. That's how it all started. We were your classic high school sweethearts. Prom night, first kiss under the stars, and all that other corny shit. But his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, loved me from the moment I walked in. "Luna, you are the girl we were all hoping Jack would find," Mrs. Dawson had said. They made me feel like one of their own. My younger sister Lily was the only person who didn't seem all that excited. She's 4 years behind me, and to be honest, we have never been close. I caught her eye one time, gazing real silly-like at Jack. I chalked it up to sisters being sisters. Jack and I got married when we were both 23. I had just finished college and started working as an economist. Jack took a job as a security guard. It wasn't much, but we were happy, or so I thought. A year into our marriage, our twins, Alex and Ben, were born. Jack was over the moon at first. "We're a real family now, Luna," he said, holding them at the hospital. But that joy didn't last. He started coming home late, sometimes not at all. "Where have you been?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice steady. Out, he'd snap back, avoiding my gaze. It was like living with a stranger. Then came the fight that changed everything. Money was tight, and the twins wouldn't stop crying. "Can't you make them stop?" Jack yelled one night. "I'm doing my best, Jack." "They're your kids too," I fired back. He stormed out of the house that night. The next morning, Jack and all his stuff were gone. Vanished. I called him over and over. No answer. In a panic, I called my parents. "Have you heard from Jack?" I asked, my voice trembling. There was a pause on the line. "Luna, honey, Lily's gone too," my dad finally said. My heart sank. It couldn't be, but deep down I knew. Betrayed by my husband and my sister, I leaned on my parents and Jack's folks during that time. They were all I had left. "We're here for you, Luna," Mr. Dawson assured me, his voice heavy with disappointment. I filed for divorce. No sign of Jack or Lily. I was alone with 2 boys to raise and a broken heart, but I was determined to keep going for my boys. Life without Jack was like walking through a never-ending storm, me with my twin boys, Alex and Ben, just trying to keep our heads above water. I remember one evening, the boys were crying nonstop. I was at my wit's end. That's when Mom called. "Luna, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Mom, it's tough. The boys won't sleep, and I'm exhausted," I admitted, feeling the tears coming. "Listen, honey, you're not alone in this. We're here for you, okay? Don't you forget that," Mom said firmly. That was Mom, always the rock in our family. Then there was Jack's dad, Mr. Dawson. He came over one day just to check in. "Luna, I want you to know we're just as upset with Jack as you are." "You're still family to us," he said, sitting on our worn-out couch, looking around the small apartment I could barely afford. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. Mr. Dawson always had a way of making me feel like I wasn't a total failure. But the reality was money was tight, real tight. I remember going through the bills, feeling like I was drowning. How am I going to do this? I whispered to myself. My dad came by one weekend to help out. He saw the stack of bills on the kitchen table. "Luna, you know we can help you out with this, right?" he said, his brow furrowed with worry. "I know, Dad. I want to do this on my own." "I have to," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I settled into a routine. It was hard, no doubt about it, but every time I looked at Alex and Ben with their big innocent eyes, I knew I had to keep going. They were my world now, my everything. One day, after a particularly rough night, I dropped the boys off at my parents' place for a few hours. Just needed some time to breathe, you know. I sat in the park, watching other families, kids running around, laughing, parents watching over them, smiles on their faces. It hit me then how much my life had changed, how much I had lost. But then I thought about what I still had, my boys, my family, a fighting spirit. I wiped away the tears, stood up, and walked back to my parents' house. I was Luna, single mom to 2 amazing boys, and I was going to make it come hell or high water. Life was a roller coaster, and I was hanging on, trying not to fall off. Then one day, Mr. Dawson, Jack's dad, came over with an offer that could change everything. "Luna, I've been thinking," he started, looking a bit uncomfortable in our tiny living room. "I've got some savings, around $100,000. I want to give it to you for the boys." I was speechless for a second. "Mr. Dawson, that's a lot of money, but I can't just take it," I replied, feeling overwhelmed. He waved a hand dismissively. "It's for my grandson's future, Luna. No strings attached." His generosity was touching, but an idea was forming in my mind. "Mr. Dawson, what if we use that money to start a business? Something that can give us all a steady income," I suggested. He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of business?" "A pastry shop," I said, the idea growing in my mind. "Your wife, she's an amazing baker. Remember those cakes she used to make for the church bake sales?" Mr. Dawson chuckled. "Yeah, she always had a knack for baking, but she's been out of that game for a long time." "Well, maybe it's time for her to get back in," I suggested, feeling a spark of excitement. The next step was talking to Mrs. Dawson. I went over to their house the following day. "Anne, I have a proposal for you," I said as we sat in her cozy kitchen. "How would you feel about starting a pastry shop? You bake, I'll handle the finances, and George can manage the front end." Anne looked surprised. "Me, a pastry chef again?" "Oh, no, Luna. It's been ages." "You've still got it, Anne." "I know it." I encouraged her, hoping she'd see the potential. After a bit of convincing, Anne warmed up to the idea. "Well, it has always been a dream of mine," she admitted with a smile. We worked out the details over the next few weeks. Found a little spot downtown that was perfect for the shop. We all put in the work, painting, decorating, getting everything ready. Opening day was a whirlwind. I stood behind the counter, watching as people poured in, drawn by the smell of fresh pastries and Anne's reputation. "Luna, we're doing it. We're actually doing it," Anne said, her face flushed with excitement as she took a brief break from the kitchen. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in a long time. "We sure are, Anne. We sure are." It was more than just a business. It was a new beginning, a chance to build something of my own. And I was ready for it. The pastry shop, Sweet Beginnings, was more than just a new venture. It became our world. The early mornings, the endless baking, the constant hum of the oven. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Anne was in her element in the kitchen. "Luna, I need more sugar," she'd call out, her voice muffled by the mixer. I dashed to the storeroom, lugging back a heavy bag of sugar. "Here you go, Chef Anne," I teased, dropping the bag with a thud. George, Mr. Dawson, was the charm behind the counter. "You must try our apple pie, best in town," he'd boast to the customers, who lapped up every word. He had a knack for making everyone feel special. The shop was bustling from dawn till dusk. People came for the pastries but stayed for the warmth. We became a fixture in the community. Regulars would drop by, not just for a bite, but for a chat. "Luna, how do you manage all this?" One of our regulars, Mrs. Jenkins, asked me one busy afternoon. "It's a lot, but I've got a great team," I replied, gesturing towards Anne and George, who were sharing a laugh over a batch of burnt cookies. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when the dough just wouldn't rise, or when a new recipe turned into a disaster. "Back to the drawing board," Anne would say, undeterred by the setback. One day, we faced our first big crisis. The oven broke down in the middle of a huge order. What are we going to do? Anne panicked, her hands covered in flour. I took a deep breath. "We'll figure it out, Anne." We always do. And we did. We borrowed the bakery's oven down the street, and worked through the night. The order was delivered on time, and our reputation for reliability was cemented. As months passed, Sweet Beginnings grew in popularity. We had to hire extra help. I interviewed a bunch of local kids and hired two, a shy girl named Sarah and a lanky boy named Tom. They were green but eager to learn. Keep an eye on the cupcakes, Sarah. They burn easily, Anne instructed, showing her the ropes. Tom was put on cleaning duty initially, but he soon showed a keen interest in baking. "Can I try making the dough?" he asked one day, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Why not? Let's see what you've got, Tom," Anne replied, handing him the apron. My days were filled with numbers, orders, and managing the staff. I rarely got a moment to sit down, but when I did, I'd watch the life we had built, the customers enjoying their treats, the laughter from the kitchen, the sense of community. It was overwhelming at times. My parents were regular visitors. "You've turned this place around, Luna," my dad said one day, looking around proudly. "It's not just me, Dad. It's all of us," I replied, feeling a sense of team pride. As the first anniversary of Sweet Beginnings approached, we planned something special. A big sale, free samples, the works. The shop was packed, the line stretching out the door. "Can't believe it's been a year," George said, wiping his brow as he served another customer. "It feels like just yesterday we were painting these walls," Anne added, taking a rare break from the kitchen. That night, after the last customer had left and the shop was cleaned, we sat down, exhausted but happy. To 1 year of Sweet Beginnings and many more to come. I toasted, raising my coffee cup. To family, George added, his voice thick with emotion. To dreams, Anne said, smiling. We clinked our cups, the sound echoing in the empty shop. I looked at Anne and George not just as my in-laws, but as my partners, my supporters, my family. Life at the pastry shop was chugging along just fine. We opened several branches in neighboring towns. It was difficult, but we managed once again. Then one day, out of the blue, my past decided to make a comeback. I was checking the shop's social media when I saw a message request. It was from Lily, my sister. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her since she ran off with Jack. "Living the dream with your ex, sis," read the message, followed by a photo of her and Jack lounging on some exotic beach. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why now?" I muttered to myself. I tried to ignore it, but she kept sending more messages. Each one was a slap in the face. "Look at us, Luna. This could have been you, but you were too busy playing shopkeeper," another message taunted. I was boiling inside. During my break, I called Mom. "You won't believe who's messaged me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lily," Mom guessed, her tone weary. What did she want now? "Just rubbing her fancy life in my face," I replied, scrolling through Lily's messages filled with pictures of her and Jack. "Don't let her get to you, Luna. She's just trying to provoke you," Mom advised. I knew she was right, but it was hard to swallow. That evening, I talked to George about it. "Can you believe it? After all these years, she has the nerve to flaunt her life with Jack," I said, frustration evident in my voice. George shook his head. "Some people never change. Just ignore her, Luna." But ignoring her was easier said than done. Every new message from Lily was like a thorn pricking me. Pictures of fancy dinners, luxury hotels, endless bragging. It was too much. One day, I finally snapped. "What do you want, Lily? Why are you doing this?" I typed back, my fingers trembling with anger. Her reply was quick. "Just showing you what you're missing out on. It's not too late to join the fun side of life, Luna." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Join her? After everything she had done? No thanks. "I've got everything I need right here." I typed back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She sent a laughing emoji in response. "Suit yourself. Enjoy your little bakery." I blocked her. It felt like the only way to stop her poison from seeping into my life. But even after blocking her, her words lingered in my mind. I looked around the shop at the customers enjoying our pastries, at my teen working hard, at the life I had built. Lily could keep her so-called glamorous life. I had something real, something I was proud of. But her messages left a sour taste in my mouth. It was a reminder that no matter how far you go, the past has a way of catching up with you. I just hoped it wouldn't catch up any further. The sting of betrayal from Lily's messages lingered in my mind. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. That's when George, my father-in-law, proposed a plan that seemed almost too daring. As we sat in the back of the pastry shop, I spilled the beans about Lily's messages. George listened, his face a mix of concern and anger. "Luna, we can't let them get away with this," he said, his voice firm. "We need to teach them a lesson." I was intrigued but cautious. "What do you have in mind?" George's eyes twinkled with mischief. "A fake will. We make them think they stand to inherit something substantial." It was a bold plan, but part of me was eager for some sort of retribution. "You think it will work?" I asked. "I'm sure of it. Greed can make people do foolish things," he replied confidently. I took a deep breath and sent Lily a carefully worded message. "Heard about George's new will. Looks like you and Jack might be in for a surprise." Lily's response was swift and predictable. "What kind of surprise? Tell me more." I played along, giving away just enough to keep her interested. "Can't say much. You should come back if you don't want to miss out." Then came the call from Jack. His voice, once so familiar, now sounded distant and cold. "Luna, what's this about a will?" he asked bluntly. Hearing him after all these years, I felt a surge of emotions, but I kept my composure. "You heard right. George is considering his options," I said nonchalantly. Jack's interest was piqued. "And what about us? What are we getting?" The blunt greed in his voice was jarring. Not a single word about our sons, his own children. It was all about what he could gain. "You'll have to come back and see," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "We'll be there," he said before abruptly ending the call. I hung up, my heart racing. The plane was in motion, and there was no turning back. I filled George in on the conversation. "They took the bait," I said, a mix of satisfaction and nervousness in my voice. George nodded, a look of determination on his face. "Let's see how far they're willing to go for greed." Over the next few days, I couldn't shake off the anxiety. What if the plan backfired? What if it made things worse? George, however, remained calm and collected. "Trust the plan, Luna. We're in control," he reassured me. As the day of their return approached, the shop buzzed with rumors. Our staff, unaware of the real reason behind Lily and Jack's return, speculated wildly. "Maybe they're coming back for good," Sarah, one of our employees, suggested. Tom, another employee, chimed in. "Or maybe they're here to cause more trouble." I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to the impending confrontation. Lily was back in town, flaunting her lavish lifestyle right in my face. "Look at all I've bought, Luna." "Life's been good to us," she gloated, waving her designer bag. I tried to keep my composure. "Glad to hear it, Lily." She smirked. "Well, of course, you wouldn't understand. You're just a simple accountant." Her words stung. She didn't know the whole truth, but I bit back my response. "I'm happy with my life, Lily. That's enough for me." She scoffed. "You are always so boring, Luna. No wonder Jack left you for me." Before I could reply, George, Jack's father, stepped in. "That's enough, Lily. Let's talk about why you're really here." Jack, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Yeah, about the will. We're entitled to our share, right?" George looked at them both, a stern expression on his face. "Actually, there's something you should know about the confectionery business." Lily and Jack leaned in, eager. "The confectionery and its branches in other cities don't belong to me," George began, his voice steady. Their eyes widened in confusion. "They belong to Luna," he continued. "She's the true owner. I was just listed as the leader." Lily's face turned from smug to shocked. Jack's mouth hung open, unable to process the revelation. You're rich." Jack stammered, his eyes darting between me and George. I nodded, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. "Yes, I am." Lily was speechless, her earlier arrogance evaporated. "And there's more," George added. "I've decided to leave all my property to my grandchildren, Luna's boys." Then Lily screamed, "What? You can't do this to us. We need money to pay off these damn debts." "Lily, shut up," Jack tried to tell her. I laughed. "Don't worry, Jack. I know everything. All your ostentatious luxury is nothing but loans. Loans and more loans." The final blow landed. Lily and Jack looked utterly defeated, their dreams of a windfall crumbling to dust. I looked at them, feeling a mix of triumph and pity. They had come back for money, only to find that their greed had led them to nothing. After Lily and Jack left the shop, their faces a picture of shock and defeat. I couldn't help but feel a mix of triumph and relief. George patted my back. "You handled that well, Luna." "I just wish it didn't have to come to this," I sighed, staring at the door they had just walked out of. "Well, sometimes life throws you lemons, and you made the best lemonade out of it," George said with a chuckle. Just then Sarah, one of our employees, came up to us. "Is everything okay, Luna? We heard some commotion." I smiled at her. "Everything's fine, Sarah. Just some old business finally getting settled." She nodded, still looking a bit concerned, but went back to her work. The rest of the day went by in a blur. I was busy with the shop, but my mind kept going back to the encounter with Lily and Jack. It was over finally. That evening, as I was closing up, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lily. "You haven't seen the last of us," it read. I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of anger. But then I took a deep breath and typed back, "Move on, Lily." I have. I blocked her number, feeling a sense of finality. It was time to let go of the past and focus on the future. As I walked home, I thought about my journey from heartbreak and betrayal to building a successful business and standing up for myself. It hadn't been easy, but I had come out stronger. I reached home to find my boys, Alex and Ben, playing in the living room. They ran up to me, their faces beaming. "Mommy, you're home." I hugged them tightly, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and protection for them. "Yes, and I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. That night, as I tucked them into bed, I realized that this was my true wealth. My children, my family, my resilience. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face. I had faced my biggest fears and emerged victorious. I was no longer just Luna, the betrayed wife, or Luna, the simple accountant. I was Luna, the fighter, the survivor, the winner. And this was just the beginning.
Today is an important day for me personally, as I am sitting in my family home, a place full of precious memories and walls which contain tale of olden the days. The cat is there too, energetic as ever. Heaven forbid he would sit and be bored whilst we find our feet. charging around the room like a lunatic with his incessant gusto and infectious glee that I cannot help but partake in. It was this house, the heart of my family's inheritance, in which one day a middle-class car dealer realized his dream and made it into an incredible $6 million estate. It is a testament to his years of work and a legacy he left behind for me upon dying. Now, in his absence, my husband is keen to claim a share of this inheritance, arguing that it should belong to both of us. However, I am armed with documents that clearly state my sole ownership. My name is Marilyn, 40 years old, and I am deeply immersed in the digital realm thanks to my career at an online bank, a path that echoes the financial principles my parents instilled in me. They taught me the value of money management and the importance of financial responsibility, lessons that guide me to this day. Despite growing up in affluence, my parents ensured I lived a grounded life. My upbringing was not marked by lavishness, my allowance was modest, our meals were simple, and my education was in a public school, contrary to what one might expect from someone of my financial standing. Yet rumors of our wealth painted a different picture, leading many to believe my life was a parade of luxury and leisure. Marilyn, with your grand house and wealth, life must be a breeze, right? You must have all the latest gadgets and games. Can we come over and play? Were common queries from peers who envisioned a life for me that was far from reality. I didn't possess the latest toys or gaming consoles, yet the assumption was otherwise. It seemed like many wanted to befriend me for the perceived perks of my lifestyle. Today, as I stand in this house, surrounded by both the tangible and intangible pieces of my heritage, I am reminded of the true richness of my life, rooted not in material wealth, but in the values and memories that shape who I am. Coming from a family with financial means, I often found myself in uncomfortable situations where friends and acquaintances would ask me for money. It made me uneasy as I felt it contradicted the values of self-reliance and discretion that my parents had instilled in me. This discomfort escalated when I found myself in a dilemma after accidentally breaking Emma's gaming console. At the time, I had no money to replace it, which worsened the situation. Around the same period, Barbara, a new classmate, became a part of my life. She inquired whether I had informed my parents about the incident with the console, but fear of disappointing them kept me silent. I can't tell them. They might get upset, I confessed to Barbara, hoping for her understanding. Regrettably, when she asked me for financial help, I had to decline due to my parents' strict rule against lending money. Apologizing to Barbara was hard, and it made our school interactions awkward. Things took a turn for the worse when Barbara tearfully reacted to my refusal, and soon enough, rumors started circulating that I was unwilling to help a friend despite my family's wealth. Attempts to clarify that I had no spare money were futile. Emma then made a hurtful comment, implying that I valued money over friendship. The situation deteriorated further when Emma and Barbara began spreading falsehoods that I owed them money and was refusing to compensate for the broken console. The school eventually intervened and learned the truth, reprimanding Emma and Barbara. However, the rumors continued to spiral, eventually reaching my parents. My father stepped in, arranging a meeting with both families. Despite their apologies, the damage to our relationship was irreparable, and I chose to distance myself from Emma and Barbara. Despite this resolution, I still had to endure their cold stares and whispered comments. The whole ordeal was a painful lesson in trust and the complexities of friendship when mixed with money. That evening at dinner, My dad offered some advice that has resonated with me over the years. He emphasized the importance of being firm in our decisions, especially when it comes to financial matters. "Marilyn, it's perfectly fine to say no," he advised, his tone warm and reassuring. He also suggested a practical approach for handling persistent inquiries about money. If someone keeps asking, just tell them you need to check with your parents, even if you already know you can't lend the money. This wisdom on managing money issues with grace and assertiveness became a cornerstone of my growth. As I matured, I became more selective about the people I allowed into my inner circle, prioritizing character over financial considerations. Post-university, I was keen to keep my professional and personal lives distinct to avoid financial entanglements. These experiences underscored the value of setting clear boundaries in friendships and finances alike, shaping the person I became. By the time I was 32, I met Scott through a mutual friend. Despite our age difference, his authenticity and warmth were immediately appealing. What started as casual dating soon blossomed into a serious relationship. 3 years later, we celebrated our union with a beautiful wedding, much to my parents' delight. About a month into our marriage, my father suggested inviting Scott over to our place. I had some reservations. Scott was a talkative person, and I feared he might unwittingly divulge sensitive family information. Nevertheless, feeling more secure in our relationship, I decided it was time to introduce him more fully to my family's world. During the visit, Scott was visibly impressed by my family's home, revealing that he hadn't fully grasped the extent of our wealth. While the visit itself went smoothly, Scott's relentless questions about our financial status during our drive home made me uncomfortable, particularly because I wasn't very familiar with the specifics of our family finances myself. A few months later, the situation took a dramatic turn when my mother called to inform me that my father had been hospitalized, an event that came as a shock and added another layer of complexity to our lives. It was a shock to discover that my dad was unwell, especially since I hadn't been aware of any health issues. Reflecting on our last meeting, I remembered noticing that he seemed under the weather, and now guilt and worry overwhelmed me. When my mom and I visited him in the hospital that Saturday, despite his effort to stay upbeat, it was clear he was struggling. He even apologized for what he felt was a burden on us, which was just so typical of his kind-hearted nature. The doctor's news that he had advanced pancreatic cancer, which had spread too far for surgery, hit us hard. It was hard to grasp how someone as health-conscious as my dad could fall so ill. Throughout his diagnosis, he remained strong, focusing on our happiness rather than his suffering, which brought tears to all of our eyes. Due to hospital regulations, only immediate family could visit, which saddened him as he hoped to create more happy memories with friends at home. This reminded us all of the vibrant life he had envisioned for us. I promised him that I would keep our home a place of joy, even in his absence. This promise became a cornerstone of how I coped with the situation. To honor my dad, I decided to renovate our family home, giving me something positive to focus on during such a difficult period. Scott, always so caring, expressed concern about the extent of my involvement, unaware of the additional challenges I was facing, like issues with our family estate that I had yet to disclose to him. When Scott inquired about my dad's condition, I finally opened up about all the difficulties we were facing. It was a relief to share the burden as I juggled work, hospital visits, and the flood of emotions that came with them. However, Tension arose when Scott began to question the financial implications of my dad's illness and the status of the family estate. He even suggested we seek legal advice to prepare for any eventuality concerning my mom, which stirred up painful memories for me. My dad had always had a trusted lawyer, and the thought of diving into legalities at such a time felt incredibly raw and complicated. Scott's cautious approach to finances began to create tension in our relationship. This tension escalated a few months later when my father sadly passed away after a valiant fight against his illness. As we navigated the challenging period that followed, discussions about inheritance began to emerge within my family. I inherited a substantial property, a mansion valued at $6 million, which only heightened Scott's curiosity and involvement. Despite my efforts to keep him at a distance from these discussions, his excitement about moving into the mansion and his persistent questions about financial details took me by surprise. I later discovered that he had spoken to my cousin at the funeral, who had offhandedly mentioned that it would be a waste for such a grand house to remain unoccupied. This remark only complicated matters further. Despite my attempts to make it clear to Scott that the inheritance was mine and not something to be shared, he seemed unwilling or unable to accept this. Our relationship grew increasingly strained. At my father's funeral, Scott was present but disengaged, not assisting with the memorial services or the subsequent legal matters. As we tried to settle back into daily life, Scott shocked me by claiming he had changed the ownership of the family home into his name, presenting legal documents as proof. This betrayal was not only a profound breach of trust, but also a clear disregard for the respect and boundaries within our relationship. Dealing with these inheritance issues exposed deeper problems in our marriage, forcing us to reevaluate our values, the trust between us, and the direction of our relationship. When Scott bluntly suggested that we could continue living as roommates in the house without much financial support from him, and even threatened divorce if I disagreed, I was devastated. The magnitude of his actions and proposals was overwhelming. I pleaded with him to reconsider what he was doing, hoping he would see the emotional and relational turmoil his actions had caused. When Scott made the unilateral decision to change the ownership of our family home without my consent, he claimed he had consulted a lawyer. This revelation escalated our issues to the point where divorce seemed inevitable. I felt utterly betrayed and isolated, compelled to distance myself from the life and home I had shared with Scott. I couldn't fathom why Scott would take such drastic measures. It seemed that his perspective on money had shifted dramatically, impacting his actions and our relationship negatively. The situation worsened the next day when Scott demanded the house keys, claiming ownership. His attempt to enter the house was thwarted by security, whom I provided with the legitimate ownership documents that affirmed the house was indeed mine, a gift from my father. Upon seeing the proof, Scott was taken aback. He had entrusted a man named Frank to handle the legalities of changing the ownership and had paid him $10,000. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a scam. Frank was nowhere to be found, ignoring all of Scott's attempts to contact him. Scott's frustration soon turned towards me. He accused me of overspending and questioned my understanding of inheritance laws. Despite Scott's attempts to mend our relationship and his suggestions to give our marriage another shot, the trust we once shared was irreparably damaged. I had to ask the security guard to escort him off the property, marking the end of a painful chapter in my life. In the months that followed, I had ample time to reflect on everything that had transpired. This period of introspection helped me understand just how crucial trust and honesty are in a relationship. The ordeal with Scott, filled with deceit and betrayal, taught me to guard against letting financial matters cloud my judgment. During the first memorial service for my dad at our family temple, Scott made an unexpected appearance. Since our divorce, his life had taken a downward turn. He was unemployed and facing financial difficulties. This encounter was a stark reminder of how drastically our lives had diverged since the split. Seeing Scott at my dad's memorial service brought a mix of emotions. The people he had trusted had clearly failed him, and he stood there looking visibly distressed and out of place during such a solemn event. His attempt to apologize, though tearful, unintentionally caused a stir among my relatives. Despite his emotional state, I found it necessary to ask him to leave, and security had to intervene to ensure it was done. This was not only a difficult moment, but also a turning point for me, reinforcing my desire to move forward and leave our shared past behind. I decided it was time to move out of my parents' home, a decision I had been considering for some time. I found a new place to live, severing ties with Scott completely. Meanwhile, Scott continued to visit the property, which my mom and I had transformed into a rental villa. This new venture allowed us to turn a family property into a source of joy and retreat for many visitors. On his part, Scott appeared to be making positive strides. He secured a new job and seemed dedicated to starting anew. Transforming our family home into a rental villa not only fulfilled my dad's vision, but also created a warm and inviting space for guests from various backgrounds. Known for its stunning views and beautiful garden, the villa quickly gained popularity. We hosted a range of events, from intimate weddings to large family gatherings. Working alongside my mom on this project brought us closer and filled us with joy. As the villa's success grew, we decided to enhance it further. We added a swimming pool, a cozy outdoor lounge, and a playful area for children. Each new addition made the villa even more appealing, turning it into a beloved destination for relaxation and celebration. Symbolizing a new chapter of growth and happiness for us, our dedication to ensuring that our guests had a fantastic experience at the villa paid off, as it quickly became a favorite destination for those seeking a peaceful retreat and memorable experiences. This project was more than just a business venture. It was about fulfilling my father's dream and creating cherished memories for everyone who visited. Taking care of the villa's garden brought me immense joy and satisfaction. Transforming our family home into a vibrant place where people could gather, have fun, and create lasting memories filled me with pride. I could almost sense my father's pride looking down on us, seeing his vision come to life. This venture not only realized his dream, but also provided us with financial stability and a newfound sense of freedom. Throughout this journey, I learned valuable lessons about trust, finance, and the strength required to carve out my path independent of past challenges. This process of self-discovery taught me that facing difficulties can strengthen and motivate one. From friends, I heard updates about Scott, who seemed to be turning his life around by finding meaningful employment and learning from his past errors. Knowing that he was also making positive changes brought me a sense of calm, realizing that both of us were advancing and maturing in our ways. My father's vision became a catalyst for growth, not just for my mom and me, but for every guest who visited the villa. It turned into a hub of joy and celebration, a sanctuary where people could forge lasting memories. The success of the villa stands as a tribute to my father's vision, embodying the values of resilience and diligent work. Through this endeavor, we've created much more than just a place to stay. The villa has become a beacon of happiness, a place for crafting memories, and a testament to the idea that dreaming big and working hard can lead to remarkable outcomes.
Well, considering your father-in-law was a director at a major company, I'm just curious about how much inheritance he might have left behind. John tried to cover up his curiosity. I sighed internally but kept a cheerful smile on my face. I heard it's $54,000. John looked shocked. My name is Catherine. John and I have been married for 20 years, and our son left for college this year. Life with just the two of us is quiet, but we get by. On weekends, John joins his colleagues for football and is out practicing all day. I work part-time, and on my days off, I indulge in gardening or attend yoga with my friends. Even though we do different things, I think we're a typical couple for our age. However, something terrible happened in our peaceful life as a couple. It started with a message I received from a friend who attends yoga with me. In the message, a photo was attached. I'm at the station now, but isn't this your husband, Catherine? I hesitated, but when I opened the photo, even from a distance, I could clearly tell it was John. He was walking hand in hand with another woman. My heart was beating loudly. Could John be cheating? He said he was going for football practice in preparation for tomorrow's match. But was that a lie? I think it's my husband. My friend responded immediately. What will you do? Do you want to come over? After hesitating for a moment, I began using my cell phone. No, I'm good. I'll talk to my husband. I closed the phone and sat down on the sofa. I had no motivation to do anything, and the only thought in my head was, what should I do? I could ask John, but I was afraid. What if he really was cheating? At this age, thinking of divorce, especially when I only have a part-time job to support myself, made me think that I couldn't possibly go through all that. If I pretend not to know, I can continue living a peaceful life like before. But the idea of pretending and the ambiguity bothered me deeply. I don't know how long I sat like that, but I was jolted back to reality by the sound of the front door. It was already 7 in the evening. What's wrong? Why haven't you turned on the lights? John said, turning on the lights in the living room with a surprised voice. Oh, sorry, I fell asleep, I said. John laughed in disbelief and began washing his uniform in the washing machine. Seeing that, I realized he must have been exercising and wondered if the earlier photo might have been a mistake. If you're tired, do you want to eat out tonight? I asked eagerly, hoping that spending time together would help ease my uneasy feelings. Did you stop by anywhere else today besides football? Not really. Why? Just wondering. You mentioned wanting new shoes recently, so I thought you might have gone shopping for them. Oh, I haven't bought them yet. With that, our conversation ended, but the John in front of me seemed just like how he has been as usual. They say everyone has at least 3 doppelgangers in the world. Perhaps the man in the photo was one of them. However, once I began to suspect him, it was difficult not to. I often found myself doubting him during his late-night overtimes or sudden overnight business trips. Bad things do happen, and one day, on my way home from my part-time job, I stopped by the supermarket to buy ingredients for dinner. I realized my phone was ringing, so I took it out of my bag and stepped into a less crowded aisle. The name displayed on the screen made me frown. It was my brother's name. Though I occasionally communicated with my sister-in-law during events like our children's enrollment to their school or their graduation, I hadn't spoken to my brother in years. These sudden phone calls from your own relatives are often not good news. Hello, I answered the call hesitantly. What I heard from my brother was that our father's health was getting worse. He had suddenly collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital. After some detailed exams, they were told he didn't have much time left. My mother had passed away from an illness a few years ago, and although my brother and his wife had offered to live with our father after that, he refused and lived alone, seemingly in good health. The last time I spoke to him, he sounded fine, so this news was really surprising. After telling my brother I would visit soon and hanging up the phone, I took a deep breath to calm my heart. When I told John, who came home from work that night, he looked really sad. I see your father. Don't worry about here. You should go see him, he encouraged. Motivated by his words, I went to see my father the next day. Dad, what happened? Are you okay? Oh, Catherine, I suddenly felt dizzy and couldn't get up. It can't be old age, I guess. Sorry for making you worry. His voice, usually loud and boisterous, sounded weak, causing pain in my heart. Though he looked pale, he didn't seem critically ill. Catherine, did something happen? Did you and John have a fight? I was taken aback by his sudden question. My father gave a wry smile. You're just like your mother, holding things in. Live as your heart desires, not knowing what the future holds. For a parent, seeing their child's smiling face is the greatest happiness. Realizing what he said, I was taken aback. Although I wanted to talk to my father a little longer, he told me he was tired, so I decided to leave for the day. Though my visit was only about 15 minutes, just thinking that he could be so exhausted from such a short time made tears roll down my cheeks. As I sat on the sofa near my father's room, waiting for my tears to stop, a man in a white coat sat next to me. Are you here to visit your father? I'm the doctor in charge. Oh, I'm so sorry. How embarrassing, I said, quickly taking out a handkerchief to wipe away my tears. Taking a closer look at the doctor, he seemed to be around my age with a kind face that made me feel at ease. It's all right. It must have been a shock for you. Do you have any questions? With his encouragement, I started to ask various questions about my father's condition and what to expect in the future. Despite repeating the same questions multiple times, he never looked annoyed and explained everything in detail until a nurse came saying, "Sir, we need you." Thanks to him, even though I still felt sad, my heart was somewhat at ease. After returning home, recalling my conversation with my father, I decided to call a friend who had sent me a photo. I wanted to discuss the suspicions I had about my husband's affair. I've been worried I might have done something unnecessary by telling you that. I'm sorry for causing you pain. No, I'm glad you told me, my friend said. I've finally come to terms with John's suspected affair, but I have no idea what to do. I confessed, and my friend, chuckling, shared some advice. Actually, my husband is a lawyer. He said there are many clients consulting him about divorces due to affairs. I'll ask him for advice. Hearing this, I felt comforted knowing I wasn't the only one struggling. My friend immediately took action, telling me it's best to gather evidence of the affair and that I could use a private detective agency to do so. She even recommended a few agencies and offered to go with me if I felt anxious, making me realize how invaluable true friends are. From then on, between visiting my father and working part-time, my days were quite busy. At the same time, my husband started saying he was getting busier with work. Overtime and business trips noticeably increased, and his suspicious behavior had me eagerly awaiting the investigation results. 2 weeks later, I finally received the awaited results. At the detective agency, I was told in a hesitant manner that it was true he was having an affair. I was able to accept the reality without panicking or feeling too sad about it. In fact, knowing the truth brought a sense of relief, dispelling the previous uneasiness. They showed me some of the numerous photos and explained his activities over the past 2 weeks. There were also some audio recordings, and it was worse than I had imagined. To begin with, his football games were only once a week, always in the morning for just 2 hours. The other employees always headed home right away after the game since they had families waiting at home. He spent all of his remaining time with his mistress. At times, she would even wait for him at a diner near the football court. He deliberately washed his jersey he falsely claimed he used at the game to ensure his lie wasn't caught. All his claims of overtime and business trips were lies made up just to spend time with her. The most shocking audio recording revealed him discussing with his mistress about getting a divorce from me once he inherited his money, predicting his father-in-law would pass away in a month or so. They had also discussed pre-booking an apartment near the train station. It seemed that his recent business was related to preparing for their new life together, making reservations for furniture and appliances. They even planned a premarital trip next month. All this left me feeling dizzy. The fact that my husband was eagerly waiting for my father to pass away destroyed any remaining love or affection I had for him. My only feeling was the increasing desire to divorce him. I paid a significant amount to the detective agency, took all the data, and decided to leave it to my friend to keep it safe. When I mentioned hiring a lawyer, they immediately agreed and offered to introduce me to someone they knew. However, I had used all my money on the detective agency and was hesitant to touch our shared finances. After some contemplation, I decided to swallow my pride and consult my brother about it. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he exclaimed, annoyed. Thankfully, he generously offered to cover the expected legal fees. I had a meeting with a lawyer and discussed my desire to work full-time or as a regular employee at my part-time job. I was told that they could hire me as a contract employee, which gave me hope regarding my financial situation. With everything now in place, I started thinking about how to broach the subject of divorce when, one midnight, I received a call from my brother. He was calling to tell me that our father had passed away. I woke up John, and we rushed to the hospital. John briefly visited my father, greeted my brother and his wife, and said some comforting words to me. He then returned home by himself. Everything after that happened so quickly that I can hardly remember. There was the wake, the funeral, and meeting our relatives. I had no time to grieve. Even after the funeral, there was the matter of sorting out the house, discussing inheritance, and handling the legal aspects of my father's estate. My brother, his wife, and I were all exhausted. John, however, kept saying he was busy with work and didn't help at all. Despite my father having just passed away, John went out to play football on the weekend. My brother and his wife were visibly frustrated but refrained from saying anything because they knew about my intention to divorce him. With so much going on, I had to postpone the divorce. It wasn't until about 6 months later that things took a major turn. Finally, all procedures related to my father were completed, and the inheritance amount was confirmed. By the way, has your father's inheritance come through yet? It's scheduled to be transferred tomorrow. Why do you ask? Well, your father was a director of a major company. I was just curious about how much inheritance he'd leave behind. John tried to sound casual, but I sighed internally. However, I hid my true feelings and just smiled brightly. I heard it's about $54,000. That much? Yes, Dad must have worked hard to save that much. I just got a call today from the lawyer saying everything's ready. It'll be transferred tomorrow. So maybe we can go out and eat something delicious to celebrate. Emphasizing the fact that it would be transferred the next day, I smiled at him. Oh, right. John seemed lost in thought. The next day, after John had gone to work, before I headed to my own job, I conspicuously placed the bank book on the desk. When I returned from work, as expected, the bank book was gone, and instead, there was a signed divorce paper. I hadn't anticipated things to go this smoothly, so while thinking he took the bait, I headed to my lawyer handling my divorce and explained the current situation. I decided not to return home, instead heading straight to my family home where my father had passed away. Most of my belongings were already there. The things where I lived with John were shared, and how to handle them would be decided later on. Probably John and his mistress would end up living there. I've already submitted the divorce papers. There's no reason to contact my estranged husband. The only thing might be a claim for damages for his affair from my lawyer. However, since they couldn't contact him, nothing could be done at the moment. But 3 days after I returned to my family home, I received a call from John. "Catherine, what's going on? There's no money in the bank account. Where's the inheritance, and where are you? Inheritance is mine. Why would you use it?" I decided to play down for the time being by asking about my whereabouts. It seems John has returned to our home. I need to contact my lawyer immediately. Anyway, why isn't the $4,000 in your bank account? Did you take my bank account? I was planning to change the account for my salary deposit, but it disappeared. I've been looking for it. Don't mess with me. We're married. It's a shared asset. You should share it with me. I wish you wouldn't yell over the phone. It hurts my ears. The inheritance is an individual asset, not a shared asset. Plus, I've already filed for divorce. We're no longer a married couple. Please stop contacting me. I won't return home. It's okay for you to live there with your mistress. Goodbye. I could hear John catching his breath, but I hung up on him and immediately relayed John's whereabouts to the law firm. That night, I received several calls from John, but I ignored them all and enjoyed a drink by myself. Having endured the suspicions of John's affair for almost a year, I deeply appreciated the peacefulness I was experiencing. After a good night's sleep and checking my phone, I was shocked at the sheer volume of missed calls. I assumed my lawyer must have contacted him, causing him to panic. Hesitantly, I checked the messages. Some were aggressive, like, "What do you mean by damages for the affair? If you knew, you should have said so." Others were apologetic. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I want to talk things over." Without replying, I left my phone behind and headed to work. In my bag was a new phone, a number John wouldn't know. This would be my main phone from now on. I had John's personality figured out, so I was well prepared. Later, my lawyer informed me that John insisted on discussing this face-to-face, so I decided it was time for a confrontation. I expected this and felt it was better to settle matters swiftly. I chose a family restaurant with semi-private booths for our discussion to avoid any public attention. As expected, John and his mistress arrived on time. Seeing John after months, he looked somewhat tired. Was it just my imagination? I had seen photos of his mistress, but was meeting her in person for the first time. She had her hair up in a bun and wore casual clothes. Her youthful face made me think she was a student, but I knew from my investigation that she was 25 and worked at a cake shop. I couldn't comprehend what such a cute girl saw in a 50-year-old man. "Catherine, what's going on? There's no inheritance, and now a claim for damages. I'm completely lost." But both my lawyer and I couldn't help but chuckle at John's words. "The inheritance is what my father left for me. John, you have no right to it. As for the damages, it's because our divorce is due to your affair, and you too owe compensation for the pain you caused me. It's not about the affair, it's due to our incompatible personalities. Besides, it wasn't you who brought up the divorce. I did. So the affair doesn't matter. Hearing such nonsense makes me want to pull my hair out. I knew he wasn't the brightest, but I didn't expect him to lack basic common sense to this extent. The one at fault can't initiate the divorce. It's not about who brings it up first. It's about you having an affair. If that's true, you understand that you're in the wrong, right? Also, I'll be demanding compensation from her too. What? Why me? Despite her cute appearance, she sounded very defiant and sharp. Is that true? John looked at the lawyer as if he was clinging on to hope. Unfortunately, it is true. You said I'd be getting money. I wasn't told I'd have to pay. I'm going home, and since I'm divorcing you, this has nothing to do with me. As she raised her voice, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the restaurant. It was embarrassing as other customers turned to look at our table. We know where she works, so it'll be fine, the lawyer said with a reassuring smile, causing John's face to go pale. Perhaps he realized he couldn't escape. You know that girl is quite headstrong. She used to be a good girl when we were having an affair. She was always smiling around me and would cry, saying she'd miss me when it was time for me to leave. Even though he was talking about their affair, I didn't know how to react. After we started living together, her cooking wasn't great. She constantly wanted new bags or clothes. It was cute at first, but being married to her was not what I expected. Even though they'd only been married for about a month, complaints about her started pouring out of John's mouth. I've realized something. I've always been comparing her to you, Catherine. You're skilled at housework, great at cooking. You always waited for me to come home without a single complaint. So would you consider giving us another chance? I was left in disbelief and couldn't keep my mouth shut. I never anticipated this turn of events, and even the lawyer seemed too stunned to speak. There's no way. Come on, I'll change. I promise I'll never cheat again. You cheated on me while using the excuse of being busy at work, didn't you? How can I believe anything you say? John lowered his head, repeating, I want to start over. You said you were busy with work when my father was dying. He was in critical condition for about a month, but you never visited him even once. Even though I was having a difficult time, you were cheating. After he passed away, were you just waiting for the inheritance? I noticed our drawer being opened several times where we'd put our bank book in. You probably planned to leave once the inheritance came in, right, with the divorce papers already filled out. As I listed each fact, John began to tremble. He probably never thought he'd get caught. You had a reservation to buy a nice apartment already, right? But unfortunately, since you didn't get the inheritance, you had to cancel. I assume the old house we lived in must have been unbearable for her. How did you know? I asked. I have plenty of evidence, I replied. Are you thinking that if we get remarried, you won't have to pay the compensation? With that, John got silent. I must have gotten him, huh? Realizing he was only after my money made me really sad and disappointed. If there's nothing more to discuss, I'm leaving. Wait, John grabbed my arm as I tried to leave. Catherine, you're the most important thing to me. Please, I beg you, let's start over. John's eyes were filled with tears. I'll never betray you again, and I'll do all the chores. Please come back to me. Unable to contain his emotions, John began to sob uncontrollably. Come on, don't make a scene. Aren't you and your mistress Nuliud? Why don't you two sort things out? Let's just move on with our separate lives. Turns out she's been cheating on me. She seems to have married me for my money. Without money, I'm just an old man. Seeing my ex-husband crumbling to the floor crying was undeniably pathetic, but I felt no obligation to comfort him. People seemed to have heard our conversation, and it was painfully embarrassing to witness everyone whispering about John. Leaving my crying ex-husband behind, I picked up the bill, and my lawyer and I left. Later, as the two of them adamantly refused to pay compensation, I consulted with John's parents over the phone. Having little interaction with the rather shy in-laws who lived far away, this was my first call to them since thanking them for attending my father's funeral. To my surprise, I discovered John hadn't told his parents about our divorce or his remarriage to his mistress. This revelation left his parents in shock, with my ex-mother-in-law being bedridden from the strain. "Give us some time." "We're not sure what to do," was their unsure response, making it clear I couldn't rely on them. However, the next day, my father-in-law brought his brother to confront John. His brother, compared to John, was a lively, talkative, and cheerful man. John had often grumbled to me about how intimidating he was during family gatherings. Whatever transpired, his strong-willed brother made John agree to the compensation payment. Then his brother decided John would be taken back to the countryside. Tearfully, my father-in-law informed me of this decision. Since both in-laws were over 80 and had no income, they promised John would work at a factory owned by a relative nearby and pay me the compensation. As for John's mistress, her whereabouts were unknown. But since her workplace was known, they contacted her there. She shouted, "Don't contact my workplace." However, I spoke with a woman claiming to be the manager and was informed of an astonishing fact. It seems that the person John was referring to when he said, "She's cheating on me," was the husband of the store manager, and she was apparently preparing to sue them. I was assured that John's mistress would never escape justice, and true to that word, a few months later, I received the compensation payment. When I visited the cake shop to express my gratitude, as expected, the mistress was nowhere in sight. Naturally, she was fired from the cake shop. She had dreams of becoming a pastry chef, but that's now believed to be impossible. Currently, to repay the compensation, she's juggling multiple jobs. According to the store manager, she can often be seen at a nearby construction site. Out of sheer curiosity, I took a glance and noticed her without makeup, sweaty, and being yelled at by an older man while she worked. Having to pay compensation for the two affairs she had, she must be deeply in debt. I'm not sure how many years it'll take her to repay it, but she got karma for destroying someone's family. When I told my son about the divorce, he was genuinely surprised, but he said something along the lines of, "It's your life. You should live it as you see fit," which was a relief. My biggest concern had always been how my son would react. With me approaching 50, I thought there'd be no chance for love or even remarriage. But lately, there's someone I've been interested in. He's the doctor who took care of my father in his final moments. Every time I visited the hospital, we'd end up chatting, and I found him to be very nice and wonderful. After the divorce, during one of my solo trips to the shopping mall, we bumped into each other. In our conversation, I discovered that he was also divorced. We connected even more over our similar experiences. We've been out for meals a couple of times, and I always feel very comfortable around him. I don't know what the future holds, but I still hope and strive for happiness in my life.